Welcome, my friends. In this video, I have a Google Sheets spreadsheet that is in a similar format to how you might download a gradebook from a program like Blackboard. So I have the section that all the students are in. I have some test grades, final exam grades, some homework grades, some quiz grades, a project grade, and then I have the way that the final grades are going to be assigned based on the grade distribution. Now, clearly, a grading system like Blackboard would be able to automatically assign the grades using this, but I'm going to do the calculation here in Google Sheets, and then we're going to eventually assign a letter grade for each student based on this grading scale, and then we're going to summarize some of that information. So as is always the case, if you'd like to follow along with this, you can download or access this Google Sheets file in the link in the description of this video. I'm going to go here and File and make a copy, and that's going to allow me or you, if you're following along here, to be able to edit this file. So if you go ahead and make a copy, you can title this whatever you like to. I'm going to title it with my first and last name, Google Sheets, and make a copy. And now we should be able to edit that. Okay, the very first thing we would like to do is to find the weighted total grade. So the grades are determined by a grade distribution, and it's a weighted average of 40% for tests. The final exam is 20%, the homeworks are 10%, the quizzes are 20%, and the project is 10%. And we have all those grades in the first several columns there. So let's create another column here for the weighted average final grade. And then I'm going to increase the size of this by double-clicking between the two columns. And basically the way that you can calculate a weighted average is you can take basically each category or the average of each category and multiply it by the weight. So if I take the average of the test scores and multiply by 40% or 0.4, and then I add the final exam score times 0.2, and then I add the average of the homeworks, etc., I'm going to get the weighted average final grade. So let's go ahead and do that. So first I need to do the average of the tests multiplied by 40%. So I'm going to use the average function, and I'm going to do equals average, open parentheses, and now I need the test grades. So I'm going to scroll over here, and I'm going to find the test grades. The test grades are here, 1, 2, and 3, so I can just highlight those three grades for the very first person. So I'm just doing this for the very first person, and then we're going to be able to copy this down for all of the other students. So the average of their test grades, which would tell me here it's about 53% for that person, and that needs to be multiplied by the corresponding weight here of 40%. Now this 40% is going to need to be an absolute reference because I'm going to need to always access this 40% as I drag the formula down. So I'm going to press F4 here to change this to an absolute reference so that this 40% is going to be referenced even for the other students later. Now the B2 through D2 do not need to be an absolute reference because these ones are going to change, right? These ones are going to change as I drag the formula down, and that's what we want, right? We do not want that to happen to Q4, so we need to press F4 or add the dollar signs here to ensure this 40% is always being referenced for every student. And then we have to add to that the final exam score. Now the final exam is not an average. There's only one final exam. It's not like tests where there's 3 of them. So we don't need an average function here. We could just go right over here and find the final exam, which is 72.5, and multiply that by, let's scroll back over, the final exam grade, once again making that one an absolute reference by pressing F4. And then to that we need to add the average of the homeworks, right? There's 3 different homeworks here, so we're going to have to average those. So I'm going to scroll over and highlight those to average the homeworks. And then I'm going to multiply that by the homework weight, which is 10%. Absolute reference that. Add that to the average of the quizzes, which are right here. Multiply that by 20%. Absolute reference, and then finally add that to the one project. Now I can't really access the project here. It's kind of like in the way. If you start to kind of scroll around, you might be able to get to that value. But if you can tell what cell it's in, you can always just type that in. So I could have typed in L2 to get it. You could also kind of arrow around in order to kind of access that. So in this case, we need the L2, and that needs to be multiplied by the project, which is 10%. There's only one project, so we don't need an average there either. We'll use an absolute reference there. We're going to press enter, and it's going to give me the weighted average final grade for that first person, which ends up being a 61.4. Now we can either go ahead and we can accept the autofill, and that's going to finish that formula for all the other students. Or if I miss that, I can have the first cell selected here, and I can double click on the fill handle, and that will extend the formula down for every single student, right? Now it looks like it's going maybe several decimal places here. Maybe I don't want those to be seen, so I could go ahead and highlight this first column. I can either click on column M, or I can click on the very first value and hold down Control and Shift and down arrow. Either way, I'll have highlighted that column, and now I need to change the decimal places. I want to decrease the decimal places to maybe 2 decimal places. So the internal part of the cell really is keeping all those decimal places, but just what's shown here is the rounded version. So really, it actually is keeping all of those decimal places. They're all kept. And if I was to do more calculations based on this, it would do it based on the unrounded value, but now what's being displayed in the cell is only now 2 decimal places. Okay, the next thing I'd like to do is assign the final letter grade based on the grading scale here. So we're going to have anywhere from an F all the way up to, I think this should be an A here, not an A minus. I must have made a mistake there. So we should have anywhere from an F all the way up to an A for our grading scale. And we want to assign that. And obviously, we're not going to do this manually. I mean, this would be very tedious to do manually. So the very first person looks like they got a D minus, right? They're above a 60, but not up to a 63. So that's a D minus. Or the next person here, a 78. That's looking like a C plus, right? But that's going to take you forever to do for all of these, 100 plus students. And it's a little bit, error prone as well. So instead, we're going to use a special function called Vlookup. But before we get into this, let's just title this new column. And what did I have as the title for this one? Let's title this final letter grade. And let's increase the size of that as well. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a function called Vlookup, which stands for vertical lookup. And inside the Vlookup function, if I start this here, equals Vlookup, and open the parentheses, it's going to tell me the arguments or the inputs into this function. Now, the first thing is the search key. And basically what this is going to be for us is it's going to be our weighted average final grade. And what we're going to tell Google Sheets to do is we're going to click on that value. Maybe I'll do it now. And then it's going to say, okay, find that value in some range. Well, in what range would I like to find that value? Well, I want to find that value in the range of the grading scale. But I'm not just going to highlight the very first column of this. I'm also going to highlight the second column. Because basically what this Vlookup function is going to get us to do is it's going to find this value, find the 61.4, which is what I referenced here, in this table, specifically in the first column of this table. So it's going to find that value, or the closest value that is smaller than that value. So obviously the 61.4 does not show up exactly in this table, but numbers close to that do, and the first value that is smaller than that value is the 60, right? So it's going to find the 60, and then I'm going to tell it to return the value in the second column. And that's what the next, if I press a comma here, it's going to ask for index. And this is really just asking for, based on the range that you just highlighted, which column do you want to be returned? And I want the second column to be returned. So I'm going to type in a 2 here. So that's going to tell it to return the final grade, right? Now, the very last argument here of is sorted basically is saying, like, maybe if your data was not sorted nicely here, or maybe you weren't even getting numerical values. Maybe they weren't numerical values. You can put this to, I believe, false here, and that will make it so that you're not selecting for the, less than or equal to is really what it's doing right now. So if I have a 61.4, it's finding the first value that's less than or equal to. If you don't want to do that, you can instead put a false there, and then it will search only for exact values. So then it would only work if I had, exactly 0 or exactly 60 or 63. But we don't care about that here. This is an optional argument because it's in brackets here. So we don't have to actually enter that one in. We can close the parentheses. One other thing that I forgot to do here is I'm going to need an absolute reference on this range because I want this range to stay the same all the time. So I'm going to put the F4 around that. The M2 needs to be a relative reference, so I don't need the absolute reference there. I'm going to press enter. I'm going to do the check mark, and there you go. I've got the final letter grade for every single student here. Now, a similar process could have been done using embedded if functions, but that would be a lot of work. It would be, if the value is, less than 60, assign an F, or if it's less than 63, assign a D minus, etc. And you have to do several embedded if functions the VLOOKUP is going to save you quite a bit of time. Now let me just show you a few differences here. So let me show you this last argument. So right now for the isSorted, this is defaulting to true. The options for isSorted is either true or false. And it's referring to this first column here. Are these sorted from smallest to largest? And they are sorted from smallest to largest. So if you put true here, then if you don't have a match, if this doesn't match, which it doesn't, right? 61.4 doesn't match, it's going to find the next value that's smaller, right? So in this case, it gave me the D minus, right? It found the 60 and it returned the second column, which is the D minus. But if I put false here, that is going to give me an error because now it's looking for only an exact match, right? So it's not finding a 61.4 here, so it's not actually working. So if I change the 61.4 to a 60, then it will have a match because it would find the 60 exactly, but any other number, it's not going to be able to match that, right? So that's what putting false as the last argument would do. It would say I only want to consider exact matches. But in this case, we didn't. We wanted to consider you could either put true, or if you leave it blank, the default is true. Look for the value that is either equal to or less than or equal to the closest value less than or equal to this value here. Okay. Now another thing to mention here is just to kind of be really detailed with what we're doing here. When it searches for that value, when it's searching for the M2 here, the way that VLOOKUP works is it's always going to search for that value in the first column of the table. Now, if you have a table set up where that value that you're trying to search for is not the very first column, then the VLOOKUP is not going to work very well. So you would have to either modify the table so that the minimum points were in the first column, or you'd have to use a different function. But it worked for us here because the minimum points were in the first column, so this worked out just fine. But I want to just show you here, if it wasn't in the first column, maybe you would use a different function, which is called VLOOKUP is the most common kind of lookup type function. But there's another function that's really useful that's a little bit more flexible called XLOOKUP. The XLOOKUP takes on a few more things. I can also use XLOOKUP to do what I just did here. It's a little bit, there's a few more arguments here, but let me just show you how this works as well. So the XLOOKUP, I'm still going to search for that same value. The search key, I'm still going to search for that M2 value. I'm going to press the comma. And I'm still going to look for that value in this range. But the difference here is I'm not going to highlight the whole entire table. For a lookup range, you're going to only highlight the column that contains that value that you're looking for, right? So in this case, I would highlight this, and maybe I'd make it an absolute reference if I was trying to make this in general, right? So the difference here is when you use VLOOKUP, you highlighted the entire table. For the XLOOKUP option here, we would only look up the very, you only highlight the very first column there. Now I'm going to press comma. It's going to ask me for the result range, which the result range is where what I want to be returned. So instead of specifying an index, you simply highlight that column that you want the value to be returned from. So I'm going to highlight that. So really what this says is it says look for M2 in this column, and then once it's found it, return the corresponding value in the other column. Now I'm not sure how this works. I believe that this one actually is going to give you an error because it does not actually default to that true argument. You got to put a couple of other things here into XLOOKUP if you're using this one. First of all, if it doesn't find it, you have an option to put in a missing value. I'm just going to put in empty quotes here, and then the match mode. We can read down here about this, but I think I need a -1 here to match what the other one was. Yeah, you have a couple options here. But if you say -1, that's an exact batch, or the next value that is lower. So if I did the -1 here, that's going to kind of match what we would need for this one. So now you're seeing the XLOOKUP is going to give me the exact same options as the VLOOKUP, okay? But I'm going to go ahead and revert this back to the VLOOKUP that I had from the beginning. Okay, so very important to understand the logic here of the VLOOKUP or the XLOOKUP in general. These are very, very useful formulas, so I would definitely recommend that you study this and make sure you understand kind of the logic of what we have done here. Now, you'd also want to make sure that you check a couple of the cells to make sure they are assigning the values accurately. And of course they are. So the 93, 95, 93, these are all A's, right? Because they're at least 93, or this 59.6 is less than the 60, so it's going to be an F, or this 89 is a B+. So you can see that it is assigning these values. It appears to be assigning these values correctly. Now, at this point, we have really done everything we really need to do with all of this information here. And so perhaps what you'd like to do is maybe just hide all of these columns. We don't really need all these columns. So you can click on A, and you can kind of drag over to whichever column you want to hide. Or you can click on A. If I click on A, and then I kind of scroll over here, and I hold down Shift, and I click on column L, I will have highlighted all of those columns. I can right-click on there, and I can hide those columns. Because it's not going to delete the columns; they're still there, and they're still being referenced inside this this function here. But now, since I don't really care about them, I can hide them, and it makes it a little bit easier to work with what I have over here on the right. So if I'd like to get those back, I can click this this arrow here, or I think if you highlight and you right-click, you might be able to unhide columns as well if you want to see them again. But for now, I just want to see these two columns here. Now we have a final grade summary information column or table here that we'd like to fill out. So really what we want to do here for the first 5 is we want to count how many A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's that we have. And not just the straight A's, but the A's or the A minuses. And not just the straight B's, but the B's, the B pluses, or the B minuses, etc. Right? So the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to code the B's first, and then I'm going to worry about the other ones, because I kind of want to make this in a way that it's kind of generalizable, and then I'm going to modify this for the other ones once I've dragged it to the other cells. And the A is not quite as generalizable as the B's, because the B's you could have a B minus, a B, or a B plus. But for the A's, you can only have an A or an A minus. There's no A plus, at least in this data set. Maybe in some cases you could have an A plus. But since there's kind of like less options for the A's, the B's have B, B minus, or B plus. Same with the C's and the D's. I'm gonna code the most complicated function first, and then I'm gonna drag that to the other ones. I'm gonna have to do some modification. But if I have the most complicated one first, then that's gonna make it easier when I do the modifications. So I'm gonna start with the B's rather than the A's. So in this cell, I would like to count how many B's, B pluses, or B minuses that I have. So I'm not going to do this manually. I'm going to use a COUNTIF function. So I'm going to do equal to COUNTIF, open parentheses, and the range which I like to count is the final letter grade range. So I'm gonna click on the D minus here, which is N2. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and press the down arrow, and that's going to get me to the bottom of the list. So hold down Control Shift and press the down arrow. And now I'm going to press the F4 to make this an absolute reference, because I'm gonna drag this formula down to the other cells here in a second. But I don't want, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to have to do some modifications, as you're going to see in a second. But this is going to allow me to drag the formula down and still reference the same range. I'm going to do a comma. And the criteria here is I want it to be either an A or sorry, I'm actually on the B's. It's kind of hard to tell here, but I am coding the B's here. I want it to be either a B minus, or a B plus. And unfortunately, there's no way to put this in here so that it does all 3 at once. So really what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do 3 different COUNTIF functions. One count if it's a B minus, one count if it's a B, one count if it's a B plus, and then I'm going to add all of those together. So first of all, I'm going to do the if it's a B minus, and we got to put this in quotes since it's not a numeric value, and I'm going to put in the B minus. So first of all, I want to count if there's a B minus, and it's kind of showing me here. It seems like it's doing it right. It's counted 6 B minuses. I'm going to close the parentheses here, and then I'm going to add, and I really have to just add another COUNTIF function, or 2 more COUNTIF functions, but now not with a B minus, but with a B, and then finally with a B plus. And I could just type all this in again, but since I'm going to really type the exact same thing in, except for this last little part, I'm just going to highlight this, and I'm going to do Control C to copy, or you can right click and copy, either way. And I'm going to go after my plus sign here, and I'm going to Control V or right click and paste. And now I have the exact same thing here, but now I need to have not a B minus, but a B. And I'm going to go to the very end here and do a plus again. I'm going to paste one more time. And for this last one, I want to count the B pluses. So I'm going to change that to a B plus. So altogether, what this function says is, first of all, in this range, count any of the B minuses, and then add any of the B's, and then add any of the B pluses. And if we press enter, it's going to tell us. And it actually looks like I was actually in the wrong cell there. I thought I was in the right one. I'm going to copy and paste this whole thing, my mistake there. And I'm going to put that into the B's. I thought I was in the B's, but I guess I was in the A's. So I've just moved that down into the A's to the B's. So it looks like we had 32 B minuses, or B pluses. So at this point, I'm going to drag this formula either down or also back up to kind of fill in the other cells. And it looks like that kind of messed up my table here. I'm going to go ahead and fill in those borders one more time. Okay, so I got 32 of each of those, and I think I kind of know what happened there with the border. Yeah, there we go. So that's kind of maybe the way I'd like those to look, like this. There we go. Okay, but obviously there's not 32 A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's, so this literally, the formula is exactly the same. If I click on any of these cells, you can see every single one of them is exactly the same, right? They're all exactly the same. But now that I've coded one, I can just modify the other ones very nicely. I can just make small changes here to make it work for the other one. So instead of B minus here, I'm going to have a C minus. Instead of B here, I'm going to have a C. Instead of B plus, I'm going to have a C plus. And now I've just coded for the C's. And for the D's, instead of having B minus, I'm going to have a D minus. And instead of having a B, I'm going to have a D. Instead of having a B plus, I'm going to have a D plus. For the F's, there's only one way to get an F. There's no F plus, there's no F minus. So I'm just going to delete the parts with the plus right there. And I'm also going to delete the minus part over here. And I'm going to change the B here to an F. And then same thing with the A's, but with the case of the A's, there is no A plus, so I'm going to delete the plus part. And I'm going to change this to an A and change this to an A minus. And there I've got my entire table here. Now you can very quickly verify whether or not this is right. If you just highlight these values, you can see there's 129 of them. And if I just highlight my final letter grades by clicking the first one and holding down Control, Shift, and the down arrow, it's going to tell me I also have 129 here. So it appears like I have accounted for every single grade here. 129 there, and there's also 129 being counted here. Next, let's use a couple of other functions here to calculate some summary statistics. So let's calculate the mean by using the average function. So equal to average is going to calculate the mean. I'm going to arrow over to the first weighted average final grade. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and press the down arrow. And that's going to highlight that entire range. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this because I kind of want to have a generalizable function for the other parts here. The only thing that's going to change is really this first function. It's going to change from average to minimum to quartile and some other things here. So maybe kind of a shortcut here. Instead of having to highlight this the whole time, every time, I'm going to maybe at this point, I'm just going to copy this. So I'm just going to highlight M2 through M130. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to press Enter. It's going to want to try to autofill, but we don't want to autofill here because we're going to change the functions. So it looks like our mean score was a 78.32. Now I'm going to do the minimum here, so min, and then I'm going to I'm just going to paste what I just copied. So I'm going to paste, which is going to be this these cells here. You could also just highlight those again. I'm going to press Enter. That's going to give you the smallest or minimum score. Looks like a 24.7. Let's do the quartile. So I need this, and there's a second argument for a quartile. So we have to put the number of the quartile, so the quartile number. So in this case, we want the first quartile. So I'm going to do the comma and a 1 there for the first quartile. That's going to give me the 25th percentile, the number to which 25% of the values are below. I need a median as well. I'm going to paste that in there. I need a quartile 3, so I'm going to do equal quartile that value, comma 3 for quartile 3. And then I'm going to do a maximum as well. And the maximum score, maybe due to some extra credit there, ended up being a little bit over 100, so about 102.2. We need the standard deviation as well, so that's equal STDEV, and that's going to give me that as well. Note this is the sample standard deviation, so if you're familiar with the formula, this is the one that's dividing by n minus 1. I believe there's probably some way to get the population one, but in the vast majority of cases, you're going to want the sample standard deviation. Rarely would you need the population standard deviation because the data you're dealing with is almost always going to be sample data. All right, let's do the IQR. So the IQR is the range of the middle half of your data set. So that's going to be your third quartile minus your first quartile. So I'm going to do T12 minus T10. And then there is a formula for outliers. Let me maybe show you this in the instructional file here. Or maybe you're familiar with this formula. But one way to identify outliers, values that are much bigger or smaller than the other values in your data set, is any value that's smaller than Q1 minus 1.5 times your IQR, or any value that is greater than Q3 plus 1.5 times your IQR. Those are going to be considered outliers. So let's find each of these values, and then we will use a COUNTIF function to determine if we have any outliers and how many outliers we actually have. So we're going to do this one first. We're going to take Q3 and we're going to add 1.5 times the IQR. So that's what we're calling here the upper bound for outliers, UB for upper bound. So the upper bound for outliers would take Q3, so I'm going to do equal to Q3 plus 1.5 times my IQR. I'm going to click on the IQR. And that tells me that any number that is bigger than 125.77 would be considered an outlier. Now, clearly here, our maximum is 102.2, so we don't actually have any outliers on the upper end. We don't have anything bigger than 102. Or we don't have anything bigger than 125.77 because our biggest number is 102.2. So it appears we have no outliers on the upper end of our distribution. How about the lower bound? Well, the lower bound, instead of taking Q3, this one takes Q1, so we're going to do equal to Q1 minus 1.5, once again multiplied by that IQR. And in this case, we get a lower bound of 31.9, where our minimum is 24.7. So that tells us we have at least one outlier, because any number that is smaller than 31.9 would be considered an outlier. And we do have values, at least one value that is less than 31.9, because we have that minimum of 24.7. So if we wanted to calculate the total number of outliers, if we wanted to really be complete here and make this versatile to work for any situation, we would have to code this to work both for the upper bound for outliers and for the lower bound. Now, clearly in this case, we don't really have to worry about the upper bound because we don't have any outliers on the upper bound indicated by our maximum. But I'm going to code this in a way that it would work in general, even if we did have outliers on the upper bound. So the way we're going to have to do this is somewhat similar to the way we did these ones up here. We're going to have to use multiple COUNTIF functions. So I'm going to use, and we're going to have to add those together. So I'm going to use the COUNTIF function. And the first argument here is the range, which is our final letter. Do I still have that copied? I still have that copied. So I still have that there. I don't really care about the absolute reference here because I'm not copying this formula down, so I don't really need to press F4 for this one. If I press comma, it's going to ask for a criterion here. They give you a little example here where if you want to do numbers that are like greater than or less than, you got to include that in quotes. So this is kind of I would say almost kind of like a shortfall here, because ideally for the second argument of criterion, I would like to be able to reference the cells for the lower or upper bounds for outliers. But it's not going to let me reference those cells. It's not going to work that way for the COUNTIF function. The way you have to do this is you have to do quotes. And then I'm going to do the upper bound, so anything that is greater than the upper bound, so it would be greater than this number. I can't click on this number. If I click on this number, it's going to just get me out of the cell. It's not going to work. It doesn't let you do that. So you're going to have to, you can't even type in the name of the cell or anything. You have to type in that number. So I'm going to type in 125.77, and then I have to add to that another COUNTIF function for the same range, and that would be if the value is, in this case, quotes, less than my lower bound, which is 31.9. Once again, I can't click on that. I have to type that in, less than 31.9, quotes, close the parentheses, and then that's going to tell me how many outliers I have in total. Well, it appears in this case that I have 4 outliers. Okay, that just about finishes everything I wanted to do related to the grading data here. One thing, I guess, which is always kind of useful to do for any of these data tables, let me go ahead and make the whole table visible again, is you may want to insert a filter. So let's go ahead and just insert a filter right here. Actually, it's under data, and we want to do create a filter. Maybe we want to highlight all of these cells and make sure they're all appropriate length here by double clicking. Maybe I want to create a border around these. Actually, I think I just create a border around the entire entire spreadsheet. So I'm going to Control-Shift down arrow, and then I'm going to scroll to the right here, and I'm going to do the border this way. And maybe I also want to, we want to center these as well. Maybe that'll make it look a little nicer. And if you wanted to, you could sort these values. So I could sort by the weighted average. Maybe I sort this from A to Z. Maybe it would look like this. I can see all the people who failed first. And it looks like these are my 4 outliers, the 4 that were less than 30, whatever that number was, 31.9. So I guess I could have kind of found that number this way as well. And then I can see these all the way up to the top, the highest number here, the 102.2. And I can also see here there were, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who got over 100% in the class. All right, I think that just about finishes this Google Sheets file. Well, okay, one more thing that I just came to my mind. We also have a course ID here. So something cool that you can do is if you've already, if you first sort by, let's see if I can get this right. if you first sort by weighted average, yes. So we've already sorted by weighted average, and then after that you sort by, it looks like we have section number here. Then what that should do is it should keep these. Yeah, so these now, you can see the weighted average it's still organized. It's still organized from smallest to largest, but just within each section. So this first section must end right here, and it does. So then we go to section 2. So that is another useful thing that could be nice, is if you first sort something by maybe weighted average, and then you go and you sort it by something else, these will still be organized by that what you sorted for in the first place, but then they will secondly be sorted by this one. I don't know how to describe that, but I think there's an additional way to do that with some more advanced filters, but that is just kind of one way to do it with the filters based on a table. Okay, now I'm really done. I think that is everything that I had to talk about, so hopefully you found this video to be useful.